Yes, I think so. Because that, obviously, from everything I just said, that's something that happens to me a lot. And so what I do is when I'm writing a story, I don't stop. You know what I mean? Like I start with the beginning of the story and I write from there. And even when I think about something like, ooh, like this is a question that this is going to raise, or this is a detail that I don't have the answer to, or I need to finesse that, I might make myself a little note about it in the middle of the story, like maybe in red so it stands out or whatever, but I don't deal with it. I just keep going. And then like I get the story onto the page and then it's done and you just go back and start nitpicking. But that way you don't lose your momentum and like, get caught in the first 30% of a story for a million years and never go anywhere. You know what I mean?
Hey everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. Yet another amazing author on the show. If you need any wood, Vincent has some trees that he would like to remove from his property. So we'll give you the information. You can go and get some free some wood for your fire. But he's here today. He loves cats, which mine is sleeping beside me near the fire. So we already have that in common. Vincent is a great author. And I'm excited to have him on the show. We're going to get a little future-y here on the show, which should be fun. And again, Vincent, so glad to have you here on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was telling Dave earlier, I had a tree come down in my yard from a thunderstorm last night. And literally one of my first thoughts this morning was like, the power, I'm not going to be able to do the podcast. But luckily the power was spared. So here I am.
So can you dispel a myth for us? That myth that if a tree falls in the forest, no one's going to hear it. Like, you heard this though, right?
Indeed, I did. It woke me up. Yeah, with just a big crash, and I was like, "Well, that can't be good." But it, not as bad as it could have been, I guess.
There you go. And a perfectly fallen tree. It didn't take anything out, which is good.
Exactly.
Good. Awesome. Well, there you go. Well, that's a great way to start a podcast about writing. We can talk about trees. I love it. That's good. Where are you, Vincent, in this big world of ours?
So I am in Atlanta, Georgia right now.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Is this where you were born and raised?
Born and raised, but also my dad was in the Air Force when I was growing up. So we did move around quite a bit. So I was raised like initially in Atlanta. We moved up north, moved around there for a while. I always kind of end up finding my way back here though, one way or another. Yeah. So
what's it about the community that you love?
Atlanta's a great city because it's kind of like it almost feels like a collection of small towns, There's a whole bunch of different sections to the city and they each have kind of their own vibe going on. It's a very like event heavy city. So there's always like some sort of concert or, again, like an author coming through or an artist of some kind. There's a pretty good museum in town. And then I don't see this being mentioned that much about Atlanta, but I feel like also the cuisine here is just phenomenal. Like you can find any, like name a cuisine off the top of your head, you can find a restaurant here that's like absolutely top notch. You know what I mean? Good. So yeah, it's all good. The downside is that everything's very spread out. And so it's a lot more green than most cities in terms of like there's a lot of trees and parks and stuff, which is great, but there's a lot of traffic and it takes forever to get anywhere.
One side of town to the other, yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Well, there you go. Awesome. Your author journey, where did all this start for you? Like, I'm on your website checking it out. I love the picture of the cat, which we're going to talk about in a second.
Thank you.
But where did all this start for you, Vincent?
Yeah. So, I've always been a like voracious reader. I remember, like in high school, I'd be walking through the halls between classes and I'd be bumping into people because I'd have my face in a book, like even between class and everything. And even before then, I remember like as early as grade school, some of the like earliest books that really kind of got me hooked on reading. I read Dune when I was really young. There was a kid's book called The Silver Crown, which like I never hear anybody mention, but it's really phenomenal. And so I've always loved reading. I've always been just like going through books a mile a minute. And I've always known that I wanted to write one. And I had, so I've written creatively for as long as I can remember in one way or another, but I I didn't know for sure whether I could really do it. When I was in undergrad, which I actually went to undergrad up at the University of Vermont, so closer to
Wow.
your neck of the
There you
woods,
go.
yeah.
Good.
I took a class on Gothic literature. Our final project was just to create something Gothic. So it could be, a painting or a whatever you wanted, basically. And I started off on a short story, and it just kept kind of growing and growing and growing. And it ended up kind of turning into part one of a novel. And that was really the first time, when I finished that first section of a novel for the class, I had a sense of like, wow, this I can do this. You know what I mean? So I worked on that novel for years and years after that, and I got like 80% of the way done. But like the further I got into it, the harder it was to kind of motivate myself to keep going with it. And I still would like to go back and finish it at some point, maybe. But anyway, I was 80% of the way done, and a friend of mine and I went to Alaska just to visit. I've always loved it there. While I was there, I wrote two short stories just kind of to take a break from the novel writing, and I like really enjoyed that process of just creating smaller stories. And so then I started to think I had the idea for a third short story. And as I started work on that one, I realized that there was a way that all three of those stories could kind of fit together. And the themes, like not even really on purpose at first, but like the themes in there ended up being things that I like am really passionate about just in my day-to-day life. And so I thought to myself, well, I've already got a pretty good start here. Maybe I can write a few more stories and have it be like a full collection. And it took me 10 years, but,
Wow.
Now it's done.
The overnight success that took 10 years to get to. I like
Yeah, right.
that. There you
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard when you've got I'm a veterinarian in my like day-to-day life. And so, I don't have much extra time. In that way, I guess silver lining of the COVID pandemic, if there was one, was that we like stayed open as a vet hospital, obviously, but I was a lot less busy, and so I had a lot more time because we were only open for emergencies rather than like all the like day-to-day vaccines and everything that we would
Yeah.
normally be doing. So I did have more time to work on the book because of that, and that's how I ended up finally getting it finished.
Well, you mentioned the two books, Dune and The Silver Crown, as far as a reader that you enjoyed. Is there authors that you like to read now that you're also a fellow author?
Yeah, so Haruki Murakami is one of my favorites. He's a Japanese author.
Yes.
He's very prolific, and it's like very strange, surrealist, like magical realism type writing. Definitely not for everybody, but I think everybody should at least give it a try because it's very unique. He writes in English, and then it's translated to Japanese
Really?
to be published. And then for the English language version, it's actually translated from Japanese back to English.
Wait, wow.
Yeah,
Really?
so it's very strange. It's a very strange writing style. So he's really cool. And, in terms of, I definitely have, other than Murakami, I don't follow authors necessarily as much as I just have like individual books that I really love. And if I read a book, by a certain author that I really love, then I'll go and find the rest of their catalog and work my way through. But I find that for whatever reason, a lot of the time, most authors I'll have like a book or two that I really, really love. And then, the other stuff is okay, but it doesn't really grab me in the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
So we have a lot of authors that listen to the show, and this is at the beginning of the podcast episode. I like to kind of lead the content to them a little bit to help them as an author. You're at the finish line; they're just starting, so any information is going to help them. But from your perspective, your personal opinion, based on your writing, what makes a fulfilling, pleasant read for you? Like, what is satisfying when you're reading a book that you're like, oh, that felt good. Can you unpack what that means to you? Because maybe an author writing is like, I've never really thought about how I can write my book to that goal to be satisfying to the listener or to the reader, I mean.
yeah. So I find like when I'm writing myself that I tend to nitpick every little detail. You know what I mean? And so I'll be writing a story, I'll be really excited about it, and then I'll be reading back through it and I'm like, ah, like, maybe I'll have a different idea and I'll make a little change, but then it's like, oh, but that affects this other thing that I did. Or maybe like I write primarily science fiction. And so I'll have this really cool idea, but then I'll start kind of sinking my teeth into it. And I'm like, ooh, I have to deal with this problem and that problem that this raises, all these questions. And so when an author is able to write something that really hangs together from like the first detail to the last, and it really draws me in. You know what I mean? So there's a book called "The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle," and it's a science fiction murder mystery, and it is really phenomenal. First of all, it's very propulsive. I couldn't put it down, but it's this extremely complex, detailed murder mystery. I have no idea how this guy wrote it because he even there's an afterword to the book and he talks about writing it, and it's so every little detail affects everything else. It's basically, I think about it like a watch. You know what I mean? All those little gears moving in there, and
Right.
like each one related to the other. And he would talk about how like he would change something because he realized it didn't really work with the story, but then it would affect 10 other things, and so then he'd have to go back and do that, and then that would affect other things. And like he somehow figured it out to where from the start to finish, like there's 100,000 little details and they all just fit together perfectly. And I love that because I'm constantly just like, without even meaning to, as I'm reading something, my brain is just like asking questions about it and trying to pick it apart. And when something really is like tightly interwoven like that and I can't poke any holes in it, I really enjoy that.
Okay. The one thing when I talk to authors on the show here is they come with a big idea for their book, and then as they're writing, they seem to get caught up in some of the details to the point where they get so bogged down in all of the behind the scenes information that feeds the story that they just bury themselves in information and data. So I kind of picture it as like you go to your parents' house, they've passed, you have all their stuff you have to go through, and you got to move it all out and go sort it, right? And you don't know where to start. And then you find yourself in the process of sorting all this stuff. Oh, there's a box of pictures from back in the 70s. You're like, so you sit down and start going through the photos. You're like, oh, I like this. And you've totally lost the picture of, I got to go through this stuff and get this done. Because I get so caught up in the details and I get really, 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 really microscopic. As an author, is there a way for us to give life to the details but not get trapped in the details?
Yes, I think so. Because that, obviously, from everything I just said, that's something that happens to me a lot.
Okay.
And so, what I do is when I'm writing a story, I don't stop. You know what I mean? Like, I start with the beginning of the story and I write from there. And even when I think about something like, ooh, like, this is a question that this is going to raise, or this is a detail that I don't have the answer to, or I need to finesse that. I might make myself a little note about it in the middle of the story, like maybe in red so it stands out or whatever, but I don't deal with it. I just keep going. And then like I get the story onto the page and then it's done and you just go back and start nitpicking. But that way you don't lose your momentum and like, get caught in the first 30% of a story for a million years and never go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, this also leads to my friend is one of those lumberjack guys that can take a chainsaw and turn a log into like some kind of lawn thing or like a bear or an animal. So I went up and I asked him, like, he has this huge, big, massive log. Well, you would appreciate that with a tree in your front yard.
Yeah, no kidding.
He has this big log, and I'm watching him, and he just so skillful with his chainsaw, and he's cutting it all up, and I'm like, how do you know how to turn a log into a bear? And to our point, what we're talking about, he's like, well, it's really simple. You just take off everything that's not a bear.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, that is so good. That makes sense, right? Just remove everything that's not a bear, and you're going to end up with a bear. So I don't think that as authors, maybe that's one thing we can do is just take off everything that's not required and not important to the story and get to where, you can build the story from there.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
I think so.
There you go. And we tied in the tree now as well. That works
There you
well.
go.
I like it. Okay, so let's talk about your book. Like, I'm excited to share the story, Digital Soul.
Yeah.
The big idea for the book. I'm picturing somebody, first time reader, Vincent. They got your book. They're going to open it, and they haven't heard this podcast yet, or whatever. They're going to read your book. What is your message to a reader before they even crack the book?
Yeah. So it's 5 stories, and they're all thematically related, but they're not related in terms of like characters or plot or anything like that. So it's 5 thematically related stories, and the first story is set in the recent past, and then I have a story in the present, near future, far future, very far future. So basically, it progresses chronologically as the stories go on.
Okay.
And the main idea behind the collection is that, and I started this, long before AI had really taken off, but I think it's probably more relevant now even than it was back then. But basically, the idea is that, humanity has a very close relationship with technology in the past, let's say 20 to 40 years with the, advent of the internet, and then social media, and now AI. And, I think technology and the evolution of technology has allowed us to do some pretty incredible things, which otherwise, we wouldn't have dreamed of. And it's made everything more efficient, and it's got all these benefits that are very clear to see. But I think that, especially when you start thinking about like AI and social media, I think that there are a lot of potential dangers and negatives that are not as obvious. I think it's affecting us in ways that we don't fully realize. I think it's progressing so rapidly that it's kind of progressing faster than we as a species are able to really evolve with it. And especially with the advent of AI, it's kind of starting to get away from us. I don't think that a lot of people understand fully the dangers that, AI could pose. And so anyway, that was kind of like the driving idea behind all these stories, is kind of exploring ways in which our reliance and relationship with technology may be harmful to us.
Did you find yourself doing some tweaks to what you had written over that span of time as you see the world transitioning and moving in certain directions, and new technologies are arising in the process of why you're writing Digital Soul?
I didn't have to as much, because like the story that's set in the past, that was actually the last story I wrote. And obviously that's not changed, you know what I mean? And then there was a story that's in the present, and it's kind of more about social media, which was just starting off kind of when I started writing that story. But, social media, like by and large, hasn't changed very much. It's just become more prolific. So I didn't really have to make many changes there. And then the stories that are set in the future are kind of set like far enough into the future that we haven't quite gotten to the to the type of technology that I'm imagining. So luckily I didn't really it's not so kind of like so related to the present day and age that it really, like the advent of AI, for instance, even though it's kind of astronomical in terms of like what it means with our relationship with technology in our lifetime, it didn't really affect like, the settings of the book, if that makes sense.
Okay. Without giving away everything in the book, because we want people to go buy and support you with the book, when you look in the very, very far future, is there anything that you've written that makes you a little nervous that could happen?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It all makes me nervous.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. I mean, the final story, I'll just say that as a veterinarian and just an animal lover in general, my relationship with my pets and with animals in general has always been extremely important to me. Again, just like with reading, it's something that I didn't know I wanted to be a vet when I was like a kid or anything. It took me all the way through college to figure that out. But I've always loved animals. My relationship with them has always been really important. And so the final story, it's not, this is not all that it's about, but it's kind of like, for me personally, a horror story about the ways in which technology could affect our relationship with animals.
Wow.
Hmm.
Okay. Now,
So,
being a vet, obviously, this is your passion to take care of animals, and as a pet lover, with all our animals are adopted, and I'm really passionate about that myself. So, I'm happy to have this conversation with you. Having that as your who you are, like as a career choice, and how you show up in this world, does that
mhm.
impact the writing even more? Like you find it showing up more than just in that last part of the book?
The way that the book's written, it's two novellas that kind of bookend the book. So the first story is a novella, the final story is a novella, and the middle three are just short stories. And the first and last stories mirror each other in terms of like a lot of their themes and their characters. Animals are very important to the first story and the last story. And the other way that being a veterinarian or just like a medical professional in general affects my writing is I'm kind of able to dive a little bit deeper into some of the technological aspects that I'm writing about because of my medical training. So like a lot of the final story kind of focuses on medical technology. And I'm working on a second book of short stories, or I really just finished the first draft now of a second book of short stories. And a whole lot of that deals with like the medical field and medical technology. So that goes into my writing a lot.
Okay. All right. So for people who are going to read the book, do you have kind of an ideal reader in mind when you're writing that this would be a perfect book for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think people that are looking for science fiction that's maybe a little bit like slower and more cerebral, there's some action in there, obviously. I mean, I don't want to make it a slog to get through. I think
Yeah.
it's good enough to keep the pages turning, but it's not an action oriented book. You know what I mean? It's more about kind of like big ideas, and it's a book that I hope will make people think about these type of things. So, I mean, just throwing out some authors, Ted Chiang is a favorite of mine. He does science fiction short stories. So the movie Arrival, I don't know if you've seen that, but
Yeah.
that
Okay.
was based on a short story of his.
Yeah.
Nina LaCour is another author that she doesn't really do science fiction as much, but just kind of tonally, I think that my writing is somewhat similar to hers. So, yeah, fans of them. I hesitate to throw out the name Neil Gaiman because of everything that's come to light in
Hmm.
recent years. But I will say I've always loved his writing and he was kind of an inspiration to me. So I hopefully fans of his writing will find something to like in this book.
I noticed through your website too, you link out to all the places it's available. Well, tons of spots. When did the book release?
So it's like available for pre-order now.
Pre-order.
It's
Okay.
releasing July 1st.
As far as promoting your book and getting it out there to the world, again to the authors that are here and maybe they're at the part where they're going to start promoting their book and getting it out there. Apart from podcasting, which I'm so glad to have you here, what other things are you doing to promote the book and get it out in front of people in the world?
Yeah, it's tough because I mine is like what's the word? It's independently published, or it's like I'm self-publishing
Yeah.
basically. It's not with a publisher. So the impetus, obviously, for marketing and that kind of stuff falls on me. Whereas if you get a publishing deal, not so much. And so what I will say is that I hate social media. I have never been on social media in my entire life on purpose,
Yeah.
but I did have to get on social media because it's a very effective marketing tool, like it or not. And so I would say, if you're an author, if you're serious about finishing a book, and if you think you might self-publish it, get started on that as early as possible because, it takes time to build an audience and to kind of get your name out there and everything. So social media, like it or not, it's a big part of our world and it's very helpful in that respect. Then I started so I found a marketing specialist and a publisher that I'm not publisher, excuse me, publicist that was more geared towards working with like indie authors. And so I did hire this publicist and this marketing specialist, which was a pretty good chunk of change, but they've been very helpful in terms of, I mean, this is because this, like, marketing in general and, publishing, not a world that I was ever very familiar with up until I started researching it after I finished my book. And I finished the book in, I believe, 2020. So it's been like almost 5 years of, like, trying to learn the publishing world and, submitting to agents and all that stuff. Long story short, there are people that do this stuff for a living and they're better at it than you will ever be. And I think if you can set aside, for me, it was about $3,000 to hire both, it was about 1,500 for the publicist and 1,500 for the marketing specialist, thereabouts. And it's been money very well spent because they just tell you things that you would never think of on your own, and kind of put a framework in place for you so you're not just kind of stumbling around in the dark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, for instance, one of the recommendations that they made that I never would have thought of is to do a monthly newsletter, because that way, it's a good way. It's a very good way to stay in touch with an audience. And like the kind of saying goes that you own your audience on your newsletter. So even if you sign with a publisher, that publisher kind of, like, in some ways owns your audience, right? Because they're the ones that are publishing the book, and they have all the connections and everything. But if you start a newsletter and those people sign up directly for your newsletter, well, then that kind of contact list is all readers that you have their info and that they're interested in your stuff.
Yeah.
And so it can be very helpful to just kind of, like, gather an audience so that if you have, like, an event coming up, or, if you have a book launch or whatever it is, that's a whole list of names of people that are going to be interested, and you can just click one button and send it off. So,
okay. Yeah. You're building that open communication between you as the author and your community, where they can talk to you and you can talk to them. So I did notice on your website, you had a little mention that coming on Living the Next Chapter, which made me very happy. And there'll be links there as well in the future. So keeping that in mind, I'm one of your community members. I'm on your website. I clicked the link for Living the Next Chapter and you guesting. Here's an opportunity for you now to talk to that person on your website that's listening to the podcast. They found you. They found this conversation through your site. To your community, Vincent, what would you like to say to them? Like, how supportive have they been? Is there something special, like a story or something that you can share to your community as if they're right here with us, and your words of thanks to them as a community member?
Absolutely. I think writing the book in its initial form was something that, by and large, I kind of did on my own. You know what I mean? Like, obviously you have support from your friends and family, and everybody's excited when you tell them you're writing the book. But, I would have, I think, done that even in a vacuum. That being said, first of all, everybody that, all of my, like, beta readers that I sent it out to and gave me feedback and, support in that way, like little editing notes and that kind of stuff. I mean, it ended up transforming the stories in a very significant way, to the point where I think I'm very proud of the book. I think I really do think it's good. And I'm very self-critical of, my work. And I think that the level of quality that I've been able to get to, there's no way I could have done that on my own. That is very, dependent on all the input that I got from all of my initial readers and, family and friends and everybody else. So obviously I'm very thankful for that. And I'll say that, when you write a book, you put a lot of your, not only time and effort, but kind of a lot of yourself into that project. And, writing the book was something I always wanted to do. I didn't write it with an eye to publishing it. I wrote it just because I wanted to write it.
Okay.
At the same time, it is something that, again, a lot of time and effort, a lot of, like, what I'm passionate about got put in that book, something that's extremely important to me. And so anytime I see somebody that, I get positive feedback from somebody, or, I hear from somebody that they really enjoyed it, or basically anything like that, any of this support that I get from a community of readers, means a whole heck of a lot to me. And it's not something that ever gets old. You know what I mean? It really, this is something that has been a goal of mine for most of my life. And so to hear that like other people were able to identify with it and enjoy it, yeah, it's pretty special. So,
And the most satisfying part in all this for you, Vincent, is it holding a copy of the book? Is it hearing the feedback? Like, what is it for you that just you're like, oh, it feels so good that this is done?
yeah, I think if I had to pick a single moment, I think like when I got a physical copy of the book in my hand,
Yeah.
that was pretty special
Yeah.
because it just there's so much goes into it. You know what I mean? You think that like, oh, I'll write this book and then it's done and that's that. But that's not it at all. I mean, then there's, marketing and there's all that side of it. I worked with an artist to develop the cover and the spine and all that stuff. So that's a whole huge piece of it. And just everything that goes into it. Having that finally as a finished copy in my hands was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
But, like I said, I mean, I think hearing from anybody and everybody that reads it, and whether or not, honestly, even if they have some critiques for me, like I love it all. I just like that people are engaging with it.
Yeah. Okay. So take us to your website, Vincent, and please introduce us to this gorgeous cat on your website as well.
Yeah.
Take us to your site.
Yeah. So it's www.vincentvalkier.com. So VINCENTVALKIER.com. Right now, there's just the one book, so that the information for that is up there. I've got an events media section, which lists all the, podcasts and that kind of stuff. This is the first one. So
Yay!
I really appreciate you having me on, by the way. It's a really awesome experience. And, it's something new. I've never done this before. So I appreciate your time and effort. I think I mentioned to you previously that I hosted a podcast actually about veterinary medicine. So I know that a lot of time and effort goes into every episode. I really appreciate you having me on.
One question, I love to use the title of my show as kind of like one of my wrap-up final questions, Vincent. The show's Living the Next Chapter. So the book is done. You're waiting for the launch and all that, and we're all going to pre-order. We're all going to share it. And when we buy the book, everyone listening, not if, I'm like, when you buy the book, you're going to leave a great review as well. Let people know
Yes.
why
Thank
that's
you.
important, right?
Thank you so much for mentioning that. Yes, reviews are very important because it's all, again, like from doing research into publishing, very, very important for just the metrics of like how quickly it's going to show up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all that stuff. Reviews are extremely important. So listeners out there, if you read the book, if you enjoy it, please do me a huge favor and put a review up there, just wherever you got it from.
And don't just throw great book, great author. You can do better. Do something in there that's really got some meat to it that people are like looking for. You buy something on Amazon and you're going to buy a product. I know I scroll to the bottom. I look at the reviews. If somebody says something is terrible or it breaks or it's not good quality, I might pass by that. So when people are reading reviews from a book, the more information you can give to help a fellow reader fall in love with Vincent's book, the better. So be descriptive. Tell people why you really love the book and what it meant for you. It's going to help more people find Vincent and they can sell more books. So that's something we can do as readers, is support you by doing a great review with Living the Next Chapter as my title. I got to ask, Vincent, we want to celebrate. We don't want to bypass any of that. We want to live in the moment of that. But I need to ask, how are you now post-book in the very, 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 very far future? How are you living your next chapter?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of like literary stuff, I did just finish a first draft of another collection of short stories, which I'm excited about. I've got that long abandoned novel now that I would like to go back and finish. So those are kind of the next steps for me as an author. For me as a person, I am getting married this year, which I'm very excited about. And also, I've had 3 life goals for as long as I can remember. Write a book was one of them, which luckily I've been able to check off. And run a half marathon was another. And I just did that like 2 weeks ago now. And the final one is to visit every continent. I've been to 5 and I have 2 more to get to. So that's something that I'm looking forward to doing, hopefully in the near-ish future.
As you continue to write, I always love having people back to give us an update as an author, reconnect with us as an audience, and tell us about your new projects you're working on. So keep us in mind. Hopefully you've had a great experience as your first podcast guesting experience. I got to tell you, Vincent, you're a great guest. So
Thank you.
If you've ever kind of questioned, should I do this? You're an awesome guest to have on a show. And anyone listening that has a podcast for authors, get Vincent on your podcast. He's a great guy to have on your show. But continue doing this, and congratulations on your book, Vincent. I'm cheering you on here from Canada and really excited about this.
Yeah, thank you so much for everything. I really enjoyed being on, and if and when the next book comes around, I will definitely be back.
Okay, and the name of the cat on your website, who is that?
Oh, that's William. Yeah,
of course.
He's a feral cat that he lives in my neighborhood, and it took me probably about 2 or 3 years of constantly getting scratched before I could finally touch him, and that's him sitting on my lap. That picture was a long time, a long time in the making. So
a lot of love to get to that spot. I like that. It's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Everyone, as always, you know where to get all the information in the show notes to Vincent's website, to the book. And as we said, one more time, make sure you leave a great review for Vincent as well. It's really going to help him out as an author. Support your fellow authors. We need more people writing, sharing their story. And Vincent, so glad to have you on the podcast. And congratulations in advance for an amazing book in the world.
Thank you very much, Dave. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.